For 7 agonizing years, the little girl rubbed her left ear whenever anxiety crept into her body. It was a small motion, barely noticeable to anyone who wasn't paying close attention. A quick press, a gentle rub, then her hand would fall back to her lap as if nothing had happened. Doctors called it a nervous habit. Teachers called it self-soothing behavior. Her mother knew it was pain. Deep, unspoken pain trapped in a world that could not hear her cry. Every specialist from the private hospitals of Santon to elite neurological centers in Zurich delivered the same verdict without hesitation. There is nothing we can do. The damage is nerve-based. It is permanent. Her mother, Dr. Miriam Cade, spent millions chasing answers. She flew across continents, paid consultation fees that could build schools, and begged professors to take one more look. They ran scans, MRIs, CT tests, genetic panels, and invasive examinations. Each time, they sighed, offered sympathy, and sent the bill. Her daughter Zuri was 7 years old and had never heard a sound. Not the rustle of wind through trees. Not the laughter of children. Not even her own name spoken aloud. Miriam Cade was not an ordinary woman. She was the founder and CEO of Cade Global Resources, a multinational energy empire with operations stretching across Africa and Europe. She commanded boardrooms in Johannesburg, Nairobi, and London. She owned private jets, armored SUVs, and estates guarded like fortresses. But none of that power mattered inside her home. The Cade mansion sat on 3 acres of prime land in a gated suburb outside Johannesburg, polished marble floors, glass walls, and manicured gardens that looked like magazine covers. From the outside, it was paradise. Inside, it was silent. Not peaceful silence. Heavy silence. The kind that presses on your chest and makes breathing feel like work. Staff spoke in whispers. No music played. No televisions blared. Laughter was rare. Zuri's father, Ethan Cade, had died in a highway crash 2 months before she was born. He never held her. Never whispered promises into her tiny ears. Miriam blamed herself. If she hadn't asked him to drive late that night, maybe he would still be alive. Maybe their daughter would not have been born into grief and stress. She coped the only way she knew how. She spent money. She searched for cures. She refused to accept that her child would live in silence forever. She prayed. She bargained. She fought. What she didn't know was that the answer she was desperately seeking was not in Europe or Asia. It was standing quietly outside her gate. Jonah Mwangi was 29 years old and exhausted by life. He held a degree in biomedical science from a public university. He once dreamed of becoming a doctor. But dreams did not pay hospital bills. His younger brother was battling kidney failure. Dialysis sessions drained their savings week by week. When Jonah could not secure a job in his field, he took the first thing that paid immediately. Gate security. That was how he arrived at the Cade estate one cold Monday morning, gripping a worn backpack and praying this job would not disappear like the others. The head house supervisor, Mrs. Lillian, met him at the security post with sharp eyes and no patience. She explained his duties quickly. Control access. Maintain silence. No unnecessary interaction. Then she leaned closer and lowered her voice. You will never interact with the child. The last guard who tried was dismissed before sunset. Jonah nodded without argument. He needed the salary. Pride was a luxury he could not afford. As he walked through the compound toward the gatehouse, something felt wrong. The air was heavy. Staff moved quietly, avoiding eye contact. It felt like a house holding its breath. Then Jonah saw her. Zuri sat alone on the front steps, arranging smooth stones into neat lines. She did not look up as he passed. She did not react to footsteps or voices. Her shoulders were slightly hunched, her movements careful and precise. But what caught Jonah's attention was her hand. She touched her left ear. Briefly, deliberately. A flicker of discomfort crossed her face. Jonah felt something tighten in his chest. He had seen that look before. He said nothing and continued to his post, but his mind whispered a warning he could not ignore. Pay attention. Days turned into weeks. Jonah learned the routines of the house. He opened the gates each morning for the convoy of vehicles and closed them at night. He swept leaves from the driveway and kept his head down. But he watched Zuri. Every day she sat alone near the garden, surrounded by expensive toys she barely touched. Drivers whispered cruel theories about curses and spiritual payments. Jonah shut them down quietly. She is just a child, he said. He noticed the way Zuri watched her mother's car leave without stopping, the way her shoulders sank each time. He noticed how often she rubbed her ear and winced, and how no one else seemed to see it anymore. One hot afternoon, Jonah saw Zuri struggling with a tangled ribbon on a wind toy. Frustration built until tears trembled on her lashes. He hesitated, remembering Mrs. Lillian's warning. Then he knelt and tapped the ground gently, creating a vibration. Zuri looked up, startled. Their eyes met. Jonah gestured carefully, offering help. After a long moment, she slid the toy toward him. He fixed it quickly and returned it. Zuri stared at it, then at him. A tiny smile appeared. That night, Jonah could not sleep. The next morning, he left a small carved wooden bird where Zuri always sat. Later, it was gone. In its place was a simple drawing of a sun weighed down by a stone. Something shifted between them. They developed a quiet language of gestures and shared moments. Jonah noticed Zuri rubbed her ear more often now, especially when the sun was hot. He began to see it clearly. Something dark, deep in her ear, visible only when light hit it just right. His heart pounded each time. He remembered his village, a man declared deaf for years until a blockage was removed. Doctors had been wrong then too. One morning, Jonah heard a soft thud near the side garden. He followed the sound and found Zuri curled on the ground, clutching her ear, face twisted in silent agony. He rushed to her without thinking. She signed pain. Fire. His hands shook. He gently asked if he could look. She hesitated, then nodded. Jonah shone his small torch carefully. Deep inside her ear was something dark and solid, larger than before, angry and swollen. His breath caught. This was not nerve damage. This was physical. Panic and hope collided inside him. He knew what it meant. He also knew what it could cost him. Jonah sat with Zuri until the pain eased. That night, he paced his small room, torn between fear and conviction. If he was wrong, he would lose everything. If he was right, he could change her life. He prayed quietly, hands trembling, staring at the ceiling. By morning, he had made his decision. If the pain returned, he would act, even if it destroyed him. Outside, the sun rose over the silent mansion, unaware that everything was about to change. The pain came back the following evening with a violence Jonah had never seen before. It did not announce itself with tears or gestures at first. It arrived like a storm breaking without warning. Jonah was finishing his perimeter check when he heard the sound of something crashing inside the main house, followed by a muffled vibration that made the floor beneath his boots tremble. His heart jumped before his mind could catch up. He broke into a run, ignoring the rules drilled into him from his first day, ignoring the warning that had hovered over his jaw like a blade. By the time he reached the side corridor, Zuri was already on the marble floor, curled into herself, her small body shaking violently as both hands pressed against her left ear. Her mouth was open wide, stretched in a scream that produced no sound, her face red and contorted in agony. A decorative vase lay shattered beside her, water spreading slowly across the floor like a dark stain. Jonah dropped to his knees, glass crunching under him, his pulse hammering so hard he felt dizzy. Zuri looked up at him, her eyes wild and unfocused, and grabbed his wrist, forcing his hand toward her ear in a desperate plea that needed no translation. The swelling around the canal was visible now, angry and inflamed, and even without his torch Jonah could see the dark mass pushing outward, as if it were alive. Footsteps echoed from the far end of the house. Someone was coming. Jonah knew he had seconds at most. His hands shook as he reached into his pocket and pulled out the fine-tipped tweezers he had sterilized earlier that day and wrapped in clean cloth. His mind screamed at him to stop, to wait, to call someone, but his heart was louder. He leaned close to Zuri, his voice barely a breath. "Stay still. I am here. Trust me." Her eyes flicked to the metal tool and fear surged through them, but another wave of pain crashed over her and she nodded once, weakly. Jonah positioned his body to shield her from view, blocking the hallway with his back as best he could. He steadied his breathing, anchoring himself the way he had learned in school labs when precision mattered more than fear. Slowly, carefully, he guided the tweezers into her ear canal. The resistance was immediate. Whatever was inside had been there for years, hardened, fused, embedded. Jonah adjusted his grip, applying slow, consistent pressure, whispering prayers under his breath. Zuri arched, her fingers digging into his sleeve, her body trembling violently. Sweat ran down Jonah's spine. One slip could rupture the eardrum. One wrong angle could cause permanent damage. He felt the object shift slightly, then stop. He repositioned again, focusing every ounce of concentration he had ever possessed. With one final controlled pull, something gave way. The resistance released suddenly, and the mass slid free into his palm with a wet, sickening sound. Jonah stared at it for half a second too long. It was horrifying. A dense, blackened plug the size of a large marble, composed of hardened wax, debris, and what looked like fragments of decayed organic matter fused together over time. His stomach churned. Then Zuri gasped. Not silently, audibly. A sharp intake of air tore from her throat, followed by a startled whimper that echoed faintly off the walls. Jonah froze. Zuri's eyes widened as she slapped her hand over her ear, then slowly removed it, as if afraid the sensation would disappear. She looked around the corridor, her gaze landing on the dripping water from the broken vase, on the faint hum of the air conditioner, on Jonah's ragged breathing. Her lips parted. A sound emerged, cracked and untrained but unmistakably real. Tick, she whispered, pointing shakily toward the old hallway clock that had been ticking unnoticed for years. Jonah's vision blurred as tears spilled freely down his face. Yes, he whispered. You can hear it. Zuri's entire body shook as realization flooded her. She touched her throat, then her ear, then Jonah's chest, laughing and crying at the same time in broken, unfamiliar sounds. Jonah, she tried, the syllables clumsy but alive. Before Jonah could respond, heavy footsteps thundered into the corridor. Miriam Cade stood frozen in the doorway, flanked by two armed security officers, her face draining of color as she took in the scene before her. Her daughter on the floor amid shattered glass. The gate guard kneeling over her. Blood smeared lightly on his fingers. What have you done? Miriam's voice was thunder, sharp enough to cut stone. She rushed forward, pulling Zuri into her arms, scanning her frantically for injuries. Did he hurt you? Did he touch you? Zuri flinched violently at the volume of her mother's voice, her newly awakened ear overwhelmed by the sudden noise. But then she looked up at Miriam, eyes shining with something that looked like disbelief and wonder. Mama, she said, hoarse and uncertain. The word hung in the air like a miracle suspended in time. Miriam froze. Her handbag slipped from her fingers and hit the floor with a dull thud. What did you say? She whispered. Zuri touched her mother's face gently, wincing. Loud, Mama. You loud. Miriam's knees buckled and she sank to the floor, clutching her daughter, sobbing uncontrollably. For a split second, awe threatened to overwhelm fear, but then her eyes landed on Jonah's open palm. The tweezers, the blood, the dark mass resting there. Terror surged back like a tidal wave. Security, Miriam screamed. Get him away from my child now. Jonah tried to speak, his voice breaking as the guards grabbed his arms and wrenched them behind his back. Madam, please listen. I helped her. This was inside her ear. The doctors missed it. You are a gate guard, Miriam roared, hysteria lacing her words. You are not a doctor. You could have killed her. The guards began dragging Jonah backward. Zuri screamed, a raw, piercing sound that filled the corridor, clinging desperately to Jonah's leg. No, no, don't take him. Miriam hesitated for half a second at the sound of her daughter's voice, but fear won. Take him to the station, she ordered, her voice shaking. Arrest him for assault and practicing medicine illegally. Jonah did not resist as they hauled him away. He looked back once, meeting Zuri's gaze. You can hear now, he said softly, knowing she could read his lips. That is all that matters. The police van doors slammed shut moments later, siren wailing as it pulled away. Back at the mansion, chaos erupted. Zuri clutched her ears as the sounds of engines, radios, and voices assaulted her senses. Make it stop, she sobbed, overwhelmed by a world she had never known. Miriam shouted orders, silencing sirens, dimming noise, holding her trembling child as realization slowly began to pierce through her panic. At the private hospital, doctors rushed to examine Zuri. Tests were run again, urgently, thoroughly. When the chief specialist finally turned to Miriam, his face was pale. The eardrum is intact, he said slowly. Perfectly intact. The obstruction was physical. A massive calcified blockage. It should have been obvious on earlier scans. Miriam stared at him, disbelief turning to horror. You're saying my child was deaf for 7 years because of that? The doctor nodded grimly. Someone misdiagnosed her. Someone chose profit over cure. Miriam's hands began to shake as the truth crashed down on her. Meanwhile, Jonah sat on the cold concrete floor of a police cell, bruised, exhausted, and alone, replaying the sound of that first word over and over in his mind, wondering if doing the right thing was always supposed to hurt this much. Outside those walls, the silence of the Cade mansion was finally broken forever, and nothing would ever return to the way it was before. The weeks that followed were unlike anything Miriam Cade had ever experienced. The mansion that had once felt like a polished cage now buzzed with sound. Zuri spoke in halting sentences, laughed at the little things, and screamed in delight when her own echo surprised her. Every footstep, every car horn, every drip from the marble fountain carried new meaning. Miriam watched in awe, guilt, and a kind of desperate joy that left her trembling. She hired private nurses, audiologists, and tutors to help Zuri adjust, but the girl's brightest light remained her connection with Jonah. The moment he returned to the mansion, after being released without charges due to overwhelming evidence that he saved her hearing, Zuri's face lit up like a sunrise breaking over dark clouds. Jonah had been suspended from the gate for a week while Miriam sorted out her anger, confusion, and lingering fear of liability. But Zuri would not let him stay away. She dragged him through the gardens, pointing at trees, fountains, and statues, screaming the names of objects with such elation that even the staff stopped in their tracks to stare. Miriam found herself watching silently, learning to trust her daughter's judgment of people over her own. Jonah had become more than a gatekeeper. He was a quiet hero who had saved her child from a lifetime of silence, and Miriam could see it now in every careful glance, every gentle. Despite the joy, tension lingered. Miriam could not forget the fear she had felt when Jonah had removed the blockage. She worried for Zuri, but she also worried for her own perception of control. The woman who had built empires and negotiated with presidents now found herself powerless against the bond forming between her daughter and a young man she had once considered beneath notice. Jonah noticed it too. Miriam's hesitance, her protective distance, her attempts to mediate and control every interaction, and yet, despite it all, Zuri's attachment never wavered. Day by day, the two of them developed a rhythm. Jonah would arrive early each morning, walk Zuri to the garden, and sit with her for hours while she practiced words, sounds, and gestures she had never known. Miriam observed silently, sometimes joining them for brief periods, sometimes retreating to her office to deal with work. Slowly, she came to trust him. Slowly, the walls she had built around her family and herself began to crumble. It was during one of these mornings, a golden sunlight bathing the estate gardens, that Miriam finally allowed herself to speak. "Jonah," she said softly, "I owe you more than words can say." He looked at her, eyes steady and calm. "You didn't owe me anything," he replied, and Zuri giggled at the serious tone in his voice. Miriam shook her head, tears threatening to spill again. "I would have done anything to help her," she said. "But you saved her. You saw what no one else did." Jonah lowered his gaze, shrugging lightly, uncomfortable with praise. "It was never about me," he said. "It was about her." Miriam nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "You're right. She deserves a chance to live fully, and you gave it to her." In that moment, the tension between them dissolved. It did not vanish completely. Miriam's pride, her fear, and the weight of her world remained, but it shifted. Jonah had earned a place in Zuri's life, and Miriam could not deny it. Zuri, for her part, flourished. Words came with delight and confusion. Sounds that had always been invisible suddenly became playful, surprising, and fascinating. Jonah became her mentor in ways Miriam could not. He taught her about trees, flowers, shapes, animals, and the rhythm of life she had been deaf to. She would run to him when something amazed her, tugging at his sleeve, her newly trained voice squealing out a name, a sound, or a word that belonged in the world. Miriam watched this transformation and felt something she had not felt since Ethan's death. Hope. Real hope. One afternoon, a month after Jonah's return, Miriam called him into her office. Jonah entered cautiously, knowing this was the place where power and authority always felt absolute. Miriam closed the door, gesturing for him to sit. She looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "Jonah," she said, "I want to offer you a permanent role here. Not as a gatekeeper, not as staff, but as someone integral to Zuri's life. A tutor, a mentor, a companion." Jonah blinked, caught off guard. "Madam, He paused, searching for words. "I can't take your generosity," he said. "I am not qualified for this." Miriam leaned forward, eyes steady. "You have already saved her life, Jonah. You understand her in ways no one else can. That is enough." Jonah's throat tightened. He had never been offered anything like this. A chance to work not out of desperation, but because someone believed in him. Slowly he nodded. "I will do it," he said. Miriam smiled, relief washing over her. From that day on, Jonah became part of the household. The mansion, once suffocating with silence and precision, now echoed with laughter, playful arguments, and the chaotic sounds of discovery. Zuri's vocabulary grew daily, her confidence soaring with each passing week. Miriam found herself learning from her daughter and Jonah, realizing that love, patience, and understanding could not be commanded, only nurtured. And then, just as life seemed to have settled into a joyful rhythm, a new challenge arrived. Miriam had received word from one of her European partners that a legal investigation had been launched into Cade Global Resources. Allegations of financial mismanagement, embezzlement, and improper contracts threatened to destabilize her empire. She was forced to leave for weeks at a time, attending meetings, providing documents, and defending herself against accusations she knew were unfounded. Zuri and Jonah remained at the mansion. For the first time, Zuri had to navigate her new world without her mother present, and Jonah had to step into a fuller, protective role. He rose to the challenge. He guided her through lessons, kept her safe from outside stress, and ensured that every moment was full of discovery and learning. He was no longer a temporary presence. He was essential. Zuri's attachment to him grew deeper. One night, after a long day of lessons and play, Zuri fell asleep on the couch. Jonah watched her, the soft sound of her breathing filling the room. He realized how far they had come. From a girl trapped in silence to a child embracing the world, guided by his steady hands and unwavering patience. The bond between them was more than teacher and student. It was trust, love, and respect forged in the fire of hardship. Weeks later, Miriam returned, exhausted but victorious. The legal battles had ended in her favor, her empire intact, but she found herself changed. Seeing her daughter thrive with Jonah had shifted her priorities. Material wealth, power, and status no longer felt like the ultimate measures of success. The true treasure was right there in her arms and in the young man who had become indispensable to their lives. Miriam summoned Jonah to her office again, this time not with tension but with gratitude. "Jonah," she said, "you have done more than I could have ever imagined. I want you to be part of this family permanently, not just for Zuri, but for us all." Jonah felt a warmth he had never known. For the first time, he felt recognized not just for his actions, but for his heart. "I am honored," he said quietly. Miriam smiled. "You have earned it," she said. That evening, the three of them, mother, daughter, and the young man who had transformed their lives, sat together in the mansion garden. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light over the fountains and manicured hedges. Zuri laughed as she ran between Jonah and Miriam, trying to name every color she saw in the sky. Jonah watched her with a mixture of awe and tenderness. Miriam observed silently, her heart full. She had lost much in life, but in this moment, she realized that some losses had been necessary to bring them together. Jonah's quiet courage, Zuri's resilience, and her own willingness to let go of control had created a new harmony that no amount of wealth or power could replace. Life settled into a rhythm that was vibrant and unpredictable. Jonah tutored Zuri, taught her how to navigate the world, and helped her experience things she had never imagined. Miriam watched, learned, and joined when she could, the house filled with laughter, music, and the chaotic joy of a family finally whole. 1 year later, Zuri spoke fluently, laughed without hesitation, and explored the world around her with boundless curiosity. Jonah had become a pillar in her life, and Miriam had found a partner in understanding, someone who reminded her that love and care were as valuable as any empire she could build. And in that quiet mansion outside Johannesburg, where silence had once reigned for 7 long years, sound, joy, and life thrived, and the three of them moved forward together, stronger and happier than they had ever dreamed possible. Every morning, Zuri would wake, touch her ear to ensure the world was still there, and smile at Jonah and Miriam, the two people who had changed her life forever. Their story, once defined by pain, fear, and uncertainty, had transformed into a narrative of hope, courage, and the enduring power of human connection. And so, in the golden light of each day, they continued to live, learn, and laugh, each sound a triumph over the silence that had once threatened to consume them, proving that love, patience, and unwavering faith in one another could